So this is chapter 22. And so this is about the frontier of microeconomics. This is actually my favorite chapter, so I need to cover this one. Not covering the previous two chapters is fine. Okay, so what are we going to talk about here? We're going to talk about the following things. So we're going to look at how does asymmetric information affect the outcome, and how can market reduce these problems. And we'll talk about democratic voting systems, so that's a problem there. And then finally, we will talk about why people do not always behave as rational maximizers. All right, so let's go on. So economists are always looking for new areas of study and new phenomenon to explain. Here we're going to look at three main topics to understand human behavior and the society. So the three topics we're going to talk about, first is asymmetric information. So this is about how imbalanced information matters. Then we'll talk about political economy. So this is trying to apply tools of economics to understand how the government works. And then finally, we will talk about behavioral economics. This is trying to apply insights from psychology to the study of economics. So let's take a look. Information asymmetry, this means that there is difference in access to knowledge that's related to this interaction. We'll look at two things. The first one is hidden action. So this is somebody knows more about another in action he or she is taking. So if I do something secretly, you would not know. That means that there's hidden action. And then there's the other one is hidden characteristics. So this is that I know something about myself or what I sell compared to the other side. So this is about attributes. So hidden characteristics is about attributes about product or about myself, and so that's causing the problem. Okay, so what problem is going to arise? For hidden action, you will have what we call moral hazard. So this means that if you're imperfectly monitored, you tend to, or there's this temptation that you would engage in dishonest or some kind of undesirable behavior. And this happens when one person performs the task on behalf of another person. So this is what we usually call a principal-agent problem. So the principal cannot perfectly monitor the agent's behavior, and because of this, so the agent tends to undertake less effort than what the principal desires or hopes or wishes. So this is the principal-agent problem. So for example, let's take a look. Here we have three examples on moral hazard. First one, employee-employer relationship. Next one, homeowners with a good home insurance policy. And parents hiring a babysitter. So how can these lead to moral hazard? So okay, employee-employer relationship. So the problem is that if the boss is not looking, then what would the workers do? Would they start to browse IG or Facebook instead of doing their job? They have these jokes about people trying to organize Groupon or purchase together activities during work. And of course, that's something that the employer may not wish to happen. So here you have this imperfect monitoring. Similarly, so for a homeowner, so if my property is fully insured against any damage, then I might be careless about my home. Or like, for example, if I smoke, I could be smoking at home thinking that, well, even if I burn my house, the insurance company will pay for this. But of course, the insurance company would not be able to monitor if I'm smoking on my bed or if I'm doing something careless. Or say, suppose I'm insured against theft, then I might not be that careful about locking my house or to prevent people from breaking it. What about hiring a babysitter? Well, when the parents are out, the babysitter might be spending time texting his or her friends more than actually playing or taking care of the baby. So, and of course here, again, it's an imperfect monitoring problem because the parents would not be able to observe what the babysitter is doing when the parents are not there. Okay, so how can the principal respond to this? Of course, as we saw in all of the examples, the whole problem for hidden action is that I cannot monitor you perfectly. So increasing monitoring is one possible way to respond. Of course, if I have hidden cameras trying to detect this undesirable behavior, then of course this would discourage, say, babysitters from doing crazy things. The other possibility is to give these workers or the agent efficient wages or higher wages. That means that if I pay you so high and if you do something bad and get fired, then it's very unlikely you are able to find another such high-paying job. And hence, this punishment or this threat of punishment would be able to try to deter the agent from doing these undesirable behavior. What else? Another possibility is delayed payment. So for example, firms usually use these year-end bonuses. So they pay at the end of the year. And so what this means is that, so if during the year you do something bad, you damage the company and so on, then the firm will fire you and you lose year-end payment. The government has this very generous retirement plan. And so what that means is that if during your term as a governmental employee, you're not doing your job, then you get fired or you get sued. So when you're removed from office, then you basically lose this generous pension payment. And so for these things, because of this delay payment, this disciplines the workers or the agent to do their job. Of course, you could have governmental regulation. So the government basically dictates that you have to do this, you have to do that. And of course, if the agent violates these regulations, then they violate the law or whatever regulation, and they have to pay fines or they get sued and so on. So all of this are some potential cures to these principal agent problems. All right, so that's about hidden action. The other problem is what we call hidden characteristics. And this causes what we call adverse selection. What is adverse selection? This is that you have this problem that there's a mix of unobservable attributes. And it turns out that it's only the bad types that will come to you. That is the problem. And so this happens when the sellers know more than the buyers about the product or the good that's being sold. And so the buyer runs the risk of being sold a low quality good. Yeah, so a good example would be if I'm selling, say, suppose I just switched to the latest iPhone 13 Pro Max, so my iPhone 12 is left to be given to somebody else, and I try to post it on, say, Chuqing Taida or some other. I think people in Taiwan would try Shopee instead of Taobao or like eBay in the US, but anyway. So you post this secondhand iPhone Pro Max, and you say, oh, so this is 90% new, it's operational, and so on. The problem is that you are the owner of this iPhone 12 Pro Max for the last year, so you know more about how good or how bad this item is compared to the buyer. And so you might try to brag about how new it is, but how would the buyer know that the battery is already only 50% left, or there's a crack in the screen, and so on? So that is the challenge. Okay, so here's the example of the market of lemons. So this is about used cars. In Taiwan, actually, almost nobody buys used cars. And it's a good demonstration of why this lemon problem is a problem. Okay, so think of this. So the seller knows more about the car because he or she is the original car owner. And so the question is, who's gonna sell? If I have a lemon, so my car is actually pretty bad, then I'm more likely to sell this vehicle because it's not that good. If it's a really good car, then why don't I keep it, right? And so what that means is that, so if you have a good car, at least unless you have a good price, you're not willing to sell it. And so, but what that means is that, so the good car sellers will be more reluctant to sell at the same price. But the bad car sellers will say, oh, great, that's a good bargain because this is really worth much lower than what this asking price is. So then what you get is the bad car. These lemon owners are flooding the used car market. But of course, if there are more and more lemons on the used car market, well, buyers are not willing to buy it at the original price anymore because all of these are crappy cars. But what that means is that, so if the market for these used cars are asking for lower prices because the majority of the cars are lemons, what's going to happen is that the good car owners are even less likely to be selling the market because they think this price is so low. But then, of course, you'll be attracting, in the end, basically only lemons, only bad cars are on the market. So, of course, when people realize that, nobody's going to buy on this market. In some sense, the Taiwanese used car market is like this because it basically does not exist. Because everybody knows that if there's a used car in the market, it must be a bad car. I'm not going to buy it. Okay, so here's another example on the health insurance market. Now it's a little bit tricky. So again, it's really about hidden characteristics. So if I'm a buyer of health insurance, I know more information about my health than the insurance company. So what that means is that if I suspect I have some cancer or have some chronic disease, then I'm happy to buy the insurance because I know that I'm going to use it. But then what that means is that the insurance company will be flooded with these less than healthy people. And so to cover the costs, the insurance company would have to charge a higher premium for these policies. But what that means is that this will deter healthy people because they think, hey, I'm healthy. I would not need this health insurance. So why should I buy at such a high price? And so you would have this, what we call adverse selection, that the healthy people choose not to buy health insurance. And then it's only the sick people or the less than healthy people who are flooding to the insurance company. And so the insurance premium will be even higher and so on. But of course, that creates a huge problem for the insurance company. So in these examples, you see how the bad type are going to drive out the good types because the other side, the insurance company or the used car buyers, they are uninformed. They do not know each car seller's type or each insurance buyer's type. Okay, so how do we solve this? One thing I do want to say is that the market itself is a response to asymmetric information. If you think of it, we did some market experiments at the first half of this semester, and there, buyers only know their valuation. They do not know the seller's cost. Sellers know their own costs. They don't know other people's costs. They do not know the buyer's valuation. And so in that sense, we are facing a two-sided hidden characteristic problem because buyers and sellers don't know the values and costs. But because of the market, we had the visible hand or we had free-form bargaining. We have different market rules. But because of this competition, in the end, this market price emerges. And then buyers with a value above this market price would buy, sellers with a cost that's lower than this price would sell. And so the equilibrium price and quality would occur as if somehow there's no asymmetric information. Somehow information is known. So that's the beauty of this market mechanism. So in that sense, so if you have a good mechanism, having asymmetric information per se is not the problem. But of course, you need a mechanism to help people reveal this information and to solve this asymmetric information problem. So it's really always about, is there a way to solve this asymmetric information problem? And of course, in some cases, like in the market situation, well, what you get is that competition can completely solve the asymmetric information problem. But in a lot of other, especially one-on-one interactions, the best mechanism could only partially solve this asymmetric information problem. And of course, one interesting thing about the market is that, do you think this mechanism came from natural selection or intelligent design? So unlike evolution in biology, the evolution of human mechanisms could be a combination of both of these. All right, so what are ways to solve this asymmetric problem? So one possibility that people developed is called signaling. This is the informed party taking some action to credibly reveal their private information to the uninformed party. So what does that mean? A signal is effective if, first, it's costly, so not everybody can use this signal, but it's less costly for the good type or for the high type. And so the higher quality product seller can use this, well, it's less costly, so he or she can use this signal to say, I am high quality. And only only the high type can do this, the low types cannot copy this. That's the key thing. So that's why it has to be costly, but it's less costly for the high type. That's one example. The other one is screening. What is screening? Screening is the uninformed party trying to induce the informed party to reveal this information. So some screening is common sense, but other are more subtle. For example, the insurance company can offer different policies to the buyers, so hoping that the high types would choose this policy, but the low types would choose another policy. In this sense, well, the uninformed party is trying to induce the informed side to reveal their information. Okay, so actually, if you remember, in the last class, we had two experiments. One is about CHT Incorporation trying to have different cell phone plans for you to choose from. And depending on your usage, you would select to choose. Some customers would choose plan A, others would choose plan B. That's exactly an example of screening. By designing different plans and offering it to the consumers, well, different types of consumers will automatically screen themselves to choose different plans accordingly. And so that is one way to induce the informed party to reveal their private information. Remember, last time, the other experiment that we tried was this education signaling, where so a student would want to choose, does the student want to apply for graduate school or to get a master's degree before going on the job market? And there, of course, hopefully, the idea here is that the employer should be able to use your education level to identify you're the good type or the bad type, you're the smart person or the dumb guy, hence offer you different jobs accordingly. But of course, sometimes this may not work. In our example that we gave in the classroom experiment last time, what we found was even the high types, everybody, the high types and low types, both of them decided to apply for the master's program. And of course, that causes a problem. Okay, so the key thing for this asymmetric information to be a problem is that it would cause this inefficient allocation, so not treating the high types and the low types correctly. And so one possible solution that we saw was these private solutions like signaling or screening. But another possibility is to say, can the government try to sometimes improve market outcome? And the challenge here is that, well, first, the private market itself can sometimes already solve this problem through signaling or screening. But the government does not have more information than the buyers and sellers in the market. So how can the government, the government is not God. So the government has to design a smarter mechanism than what's already deployed in the private market to help improve. So that's not really easy because the government itself is an imperfect institution. So you can imagine politicians would have different agendas or different incentives because what they care about is not really about efficiency, but whether or not they can retain their office or get reelected and so on. All right, so for each of the situations below, so please identify which problem it is, moral hazard or adverse selection, and explain how the problem has been reduced. Part A. After 3 years of decreasing profits due to higher premiums, a car insurance company decides to offer two policies. One with low premiums, high deductibles, and one with high premiums, but low deductibles. So what is deductible? Deductible means that, so if you get into a car accident and you have to pay money, so when the insurance company reimburses you, it only pays the amount beyond the deductible. So if you get into a small accident that only costs you, say, 10,000 NT dollars, that's a deductible, then you have to pay out of pocket. So the deductible is what you have to pay out of pocket when an accident happens. And then beyond that is what the insurance is going to cover. Okay, so if it's a low premium, high deductible, that means that if there's an accident, you still have to pay out of pocket a lot of money, but at least it's not that big a damage because beyond the deductible is what the company is going to pay, but within that you have to pay. And if it's a low deductible, say $2,000, then even if you get into a car accident, you crash your car, you only have to pay $2,000. And beyond that is what the car insurance has to cover. Part B. Landlords require tenants to pay security deposits. So which problem is this and how the problem has been reduced? Okay, so please join us. Okay, so let's start. So after 3 years of decreasing profit due to higher premiums, a car insurance company decides to offer two policies, one with low premium, high deductible, and the other with high premium but low deductible. Is it moral hazard or adverse selection? And is this solved by signaling or solved by screening? Okay, so let's look at your answers. So the majority of you say it's adverse selection and solved by screening. And yes, that's the correct answer. So yeah, so for car insurance, so there's low premium, high deductible, and high premium, low deductible. So what is the problem? The problem is that there are safe drivers and reckless drivers. But if you have a high premium, the self-drivers say, hey, that's too expensive. I don't want to join. But the reckless drivers say, hey, that's a bargain because I know I'm going to crash my car next year, right? So you have this adverse selection that the good drivers say, oh, that's too expensive. I don't want to join. And the bad drivers like, yay, that's a bargain. I want to join. And so the insurance company ends up with bad drivers. That's the whole essence of what we call adverse selection. The good types don't want to join. The bad types are flooding this. So how do we solve this problem? Well, remember, signaling is the informed party trying to credibly convey information. The screening is the uninformed party trying to induce the informed party to reveal information. And here, the insurance company is the uninformed company, but it's trying to induce the informed party to reveal information through screening. So now you have two plans. Lower deductible, high premium, and high deductible, low premium. So what would happen? Well, the safe drivers say, oh, I'll take the low premium plan because it's cheaper and I know I'm not getting into an accident. So requiring a high deductible, that's fine because I'm a safe driver and that's not going to happen. Okay, so the high types, the good drivers, will take the low premium plan. But the bad drivers, the reckless drivers say, oh, so high premium, well, it's still a bargain for me. But, well, I know I'm going to crash my car, right? So I need a low deductible. Otherwise, I'll have to pay additional out-of-pocket expense when I crash my car. So the risky drivers choose the high premium, low deductible policy because they know that they're more likely to crash their car. And of course, here, this will work because you have this separation here that the good drivers are charged a lower premium and they take a high deductible. And the crazy drivers basically take the high premium, have a low deductible. Okay, next one. Landlords require tenants to pay security deposits. So is this adverse selection or moral hazard? And how is this solved? Okay, so let's look at your answers. Most of you say that it's moral hazard and the security deposit is inducing the tenants to take care of the apartment. And yes, that is the right answer. So the key thing here is this. The challenge here is that the landlord cannot monitor what the tenant is doing. Is a tenant having a Christmas party or a year-end party and bringing a lot of friends and then having a drinking party, throwing trash everywhere or breaking the windows or, that you don't know because the landlord cannot monitor perfectly what the tenant is doing in the house. So that is a moral hazard problem because of this hidden action, imperfect monitoring. And so, but now if the landlord requires these tenants to pay a security deposit, when the tenants return the apartment, the landlord inspects and makes sure that the apartment is in its original condition and then return the security deposit. What that means is that if the tenant is not maintaining the apartment correctly, then in the end, the landlord would take the security deposit and so the tenant will be losing money. And so this would deter the tenants from doing something very crazy or at least after you host a Christmas party, you have to clean up back to its original condition, and so that's fine. So here we have this moral hazard problem that's solved by this security deposit. Okay, yeah, so the principal does not know how well the tenant is taking care of the apartment, so the tenants may not be careful if they can get away without paying for the damage. And so security deposit here increases the likelihood that the tenants will take care of the property, because then he would get the deposit back. So that's this part. All right, so that's up to here. We talk about asymmetric information. Then we'll go to political economy. So this is about the role of the government. In this class, we try to talk about the government as the government trying to improve the, say, inefficiency or inequality of the market outcome. But if you think of it, the government itself is a self-interest. It's run by self-interest people. So we can also apply what we know in economics to study the government. So here are some leading examples that's in this field. The first one is called the Condorcet voting paradox. Think of how the government decides between, say, two outcomes. Usually we have a vote, right? And simple majority rule says, okay, so whichever outcome gets more votes wins and is implemented. Here's the problem. What if we have 3 or more outcomes to choose from? Well, Condorcet says democracy might run into some problems. And in fact, this is what we called the Condorcet voting paradox, that majority rule does not produce a transitive preference for the society as a whole. What do I mean by transitivity? That's if A is preferred to B, B preferred to C, then A should be preferred to C. You actually see this in calculus, any simple math class. If number A is greater than number B is greater than number C, then A is greater than number C. That's obvious. Not so obvious in political economy. Suppose we have A, B, C, 3 candidates who want to run for the city council, and there are 3 types of voters. So here we have type 1 voters prefer A to B to C, type 2 voters prefer B to C to A, and type 3 voters prefer C to A to B. Now, so we have different percentages, 35, 40, and 20%. Suppose we do a pairwise voting. We vote B versus C, so type 1 type voters and type 2 voters prefer B to C. Only type 3 voters prefer C to B, so B wins. Then let's pit the winner, B, with A. A is left out in the first round. So now type 1 voters and type 3 voters prefer A. So if they vote sincerely, then A wins. So the final winner is A. Candidate A wins. If we vote B to C first, and the winner with A. Suppose we do this differently. So there's another pairwise voting. So first, let's have A versus C. So if it's A versus C, only type 1 prefers A to C, but type 2 and type 3 voters, they prefer C to A. So C wins. So the winner is C versus B. So now, because type 1 and type 2 voters prefer B to C, so now B wins. So the overall winner is B. Actually, there's a third order that you can get the overall winner becomes C. So you have this crazy result that, well, you tell me which overall winner you want, and I will design an agenda to get that person elected. So the problem here is that we don't have transitivity here. So you vote A versus B, this winner wins, but then you have the winner pitted with C. So you have this cycle going on that you do not have the good property that if number A is greater than B, B greater than C, then A has to be greater than C. That's not true even in this simple example. So this is what we call the Condorcet paradox. So what's the lesson here? Democratic preferences are not always transitive. And so the order which things are voted can affect the result. And so setting the agenda is a very powerful tool because it can influence the outcome of a democratic election. So majority voting does not tell us what outcome society really wants, or may not tell us. Yeah, so here, that's a problem. All right, so that's about the Condorcet paradox. So here are, the textbook actually talks about an alternative, which is called border count. So I'll give 1 point to my least preferred person, 2 points to the second to last, 3 points to the third to last, all the way up to, if there are n candidates, I'll give n points to my favorite candidate. Then whoever gets the most points wins. So then I'll reveal some of my preferences through this border count. But of course, here, if I know my second preferred person is a strong candidate against my best preferred person, what should I do? I should downgrade my number 2, right? So there it has its own problem. And in fact, so Ken Arrow actually asked this question. So is there a perfect voting system? So of course you have to ask, what do you mean by perfect voting system? What's perfect here? Let's think about this. But okay, so what Arrow proposes is that a perfect or a good voting system should have 4 properties. 1, unanimity. So if everyone prefers A to B, this voting system should have A beat B. And because everybody prefers A to B and the voting system says, no, let's choose B. That's crazy. Second one, transitivity. So that's the one that we just saw in the Condorcet paradox. If A beats B, B beats C, then A should beat C. That makes it transitive. The third one is independence of irrelevant alternatives, or IIA. So the ranking between any 2 outcomes should not depend on whether a third option is available. So the ranking should be clear, even if there's a third. So adding a third option does not affect the ranking. And the last one is, well, this is a democracy, so we shouldn't have a dictator. So there is no person who always gets its way. So if he prefers A to B, A is always chosen, or that's called a dictator. Okay, so 4 properties: unanimity, transitivity, IIA, and no dictators. So which voting system satisfies this? And the sad answer is no voting system can satisfy all 4. He actually gives these counterexamples where, oh, so if you want these 3 properties, it has to violate the 4th property, and so on. So we have, this is what we call the Arrow's impossibility theorem, which says that under certain assumed conditions, no scheme for aggregating individual preferences would result into a valid set of social preferences. So there is no voting system that could aggregate to satisfy these 4 properties. So we're in this imperfect world that there is no one silver bullet. But of course, based on our situations, we can talk about which voting system is better than the other under different situations. Okay, one good example, one positive result is what we call the median voter theorem. This is a mathematical result showing that if voters are choosing a point along a line, and each voter wants a point closest to its most preferred point, then the majority rule will pick the most preferred point of what we call the median voter. So here we're assuming that you're choosing along a line. They have an ideal point, and everybody wants the final outcome to be as closest to their ideal point as possible. Then simple majority rule works because it picks the median voter's most preferred point. So here's the example. So here is different preferences. So the median voter prefers a budget of $50 billion. And so the choice closest to $50 billion will win any 2-way race. So for example, suppose the 2 proposals are 40 versus 70. Then 40 will win. So because everybody who prefers below 40 would vote for 40 because that's closer than 70. But then for the 50 guys would vote for 40, and the 60 guys would vote for 70, and people equal or above 70 would vote for 70. So what happens is that 40 gets more votes, and 40 will win. Okay, the implication here is that in a 2-party or 2-candidate race, each party will move its position towards the median voter. In that sense, it's a good thing, because then you won't have these extreme views that one says, let's declare independence immediately. The other side said, let's reunify with China immediately. But of course, what that means is that minority views might not be given that much weight. So this is 2 sides of the same coin, but we have these implications for simple majority rule. All right. The third insight we have from political economy is that politicians are people too. So they are also motivated by self-interest, just like firms and consumers. So some politicians, their goal is to get reelected. So even if it's good for themselves, but not good for the whole country, they still might make these choices. And of course, there are others who are motivated by greed. So they prefer to get a lot of money or receive briberies or these other problems. So the problem here is that, well, we talked about how governments can improve market outcomes, but economic policy is not made by a benevolent leader, but it's by real people with their own human desires. So what you see what the government can do in the textbook may not realize in reality. Well, it depends on the incentives of the politicians. So this itself is a real problem. Okay, so let's have this example here. So 100 people have different preferences about building a new library, and here are the different budget preferences. First, what is the median voter's preference? And there are two proposals, $50 million and $30 million. So which one will win? Okay, so please join the quiz. Here is the list of preferences, 100 voters. What is the median voter's preference? Okay, so the majority of you say it's 20, and that is the right answer. Let's take a look. Yeah, so there are 100 voters. So if you line them up, so the median voter, so 5 voters want 5 million, 10 want 10 million, 25 want 50 million, and so on. So the first 40 voters want 50 million or lower. And so the next 12 voters want 20 million. So the median voter is one of these. So this is the simple one. Okay, so the median voter wants $20 million. Next question. So suppose now there are two proposals, $50 million versus $30 million. So which one will win? So let's see your answers. So the majority of you say $50 million will win, and yes, that is the right answer. And of course, that's because even though 30 million is the most popular one, but we have the median voter theorem. So the $30 million will get 48 votes. The 50 million budget would get actually 52 votes because including the median voter. And so 15 million will actually win. All right, so to start the last part of this chapter, we start with a poll. So this is a survey question asked US economists. So insights from psychology about individual behavior, examples of which include limited rationality, low self-control, or a taste for fairness, predicts several important types of observed market outcomes that fully rational economic models do not. So the first question is, do you agree or disagree? And the next question is, do you think economists agree or disagree with this statement? Okay, so now let's start the poll. The first question is, do you agree or disagree with this statement? So you can strongly agree, uncertain, disagree, strongly disagree, no opinion, or prefer not to answer. Okay, so as you can see, a lot of you are on the agreeing side. And the real interesting question is, do you think economists agree or disagree with this statement? For the same statement, do you think surveyed economists agree or disagree? So 100% agree, 50 to 99%, 1 to 49%, 0% or don't know. Okay, so time's up. Let's look at your answers. Most of you say 50 to 99%, some say 100%, some say 1 to 49%, and the answer is actually 100%. So let's look at the survey results. 100% agree, 0% uncertain, 0% disagree. So yeah, so in this sense, this is the frontier that 100% of the economists are aware of this current trend or frontier in research that start to question some of the basic assumptions of economics. They may disagree with the current frontier or the current trend or the current results, but they do agree that these new models or these new research do capture something that the fully rational economic model does not capture. So it's like a complement. Okay, so usually this is called behavioral economics. I like the other title, which is called economics and psychology. So it's basically the overlap or the interdisciplinary part of economics and psychology. So this is the subfield that tries to bring insights of psychology into economics. And the reason I don't really like the alternative title, behavioral economics, stems from mathematics. So if I say somebody is doing behavioral economics, that means that somebody or the other people are doing non-behavioral economics. Unfortunately, I have no idea what non-behavioral economics is about. This is different from, like, say, behavioral game theory. Well, we talked about game theory. Game theory started out as a mathematical subfield. So there could be mathematical game theory that has nothing to do with behavior. And so in contrast, you could have behavioral game theory. But when you talk about economics, you can talk about the behavior of countries or firms, households, individuals. Actually, I've seen experimental articles published on the behavior of animals in the top economics journals. So on monkeys, on pigeons, or rats. But it's still some entity or some agent's behavior. So the question is, so if you go beyond, if you exclude behavior, what's left in economics? This is very different from, like, say, psychology, where you could just talk about, like, say, perception or, say, vision. I mean, there are a lot of things in psychology that you could talk about that may or may not, where behavior is involved. But at some sense, when economics is about people respond to incentives, about people's choices, it's very hard to define a part of economics as non-behavioral economics. So what that means is that if non-behavioral economics is an empty set, then behavioral economics is economics. I mean, it's everything, right? I mean, what else? But of course, I mean, when people talk about behavioral economics, it's as if they think this is a subset of economics. So that's why I really don't like this particular label. I mean, so usually I call it economics and psychology. Okay, the textbook calls it behavioral economics, so I have to cover this. But I always translate this into economics and psychology. So what insights do we have from economics and psychology? The first one, people aren't always rational. Yeah, so that's number one. Number two, people are not only self-interest, they care about fairness. And number three, people are inconsistent over time. Okay, actually, there are way more implications here, but the leading ones that we do have a consensus on that's written in the textbook is these three. If you're interested, you should look into more advanced courses where we talk about a whole series of different insights that this particular frontier teaches us. Okay, let's start. People aren't always rational. So I think the key thing is that you can find that people make systematic mistakes. Here, I love Dan Ariely's book, which is called Predictably Irrational. So, because if somebody is predictably irrational, it's like you always make the same mistake. In the same situation, you always make the same mistake. Even if I try to teach you, you're still predictably irrational. But what this means is that irrationality is not like something random. It's systematic. You make mistakes in a particular pattern. But what that means is that maybe there is hope that we can modify economics models to try to capture this systematic behavior. So as long as it's systematic, there's a pattern, then you should be able to try to capture and model these seemingly irrational but systematic behavior. The fun thing is that, unfortunately, the Chinese translation of predictably irrational, they gave it the wrong title. They titled it 谁说人是理性的, or Who told you people are rational, which is completely the opposite of what predictably irrational means. Because predictably irrational means that, well, this seemingly random irrationality is actually predictable. It's systematic. So, there is something here that we can look into. It's not like just some random behavior. Okay, so what are these systematic mistakes? Number one, people are overconfident. If you ask people, are you an above average driver or above average person? Then you always say, oh yeah, I'm above average, right? 90% say they're above average. Somebody must be wrong here, right? Or think about yourselves. You chose a lot of courses at the beginning of the semester, and now it's close to finals week, and you say, oh my God, I should have dropped some of these courses. Well, we're all overconfident. We just passed New Year's. You might have made some New Year's resolution. I'm not sure how many people truly follow their New Year resolution, say in February or March. And of course, when you go back to December, then you're like, oh my God, I thought I would be able to do all these New Year resolutions, but none of them worked out. Okay, so what else? People give too much weight to a small number of vivid observations. So if something happened to you, or if there's anecdotal evidence, then you take this as, oh yeah, this must be true. But, well, of course it could be, but it could be that you are just the lucky person, 1 in a million, to have this particular experience where everybody else does not. And in the past year, we saw this very clearly from these crazy ideas about the vaccines and the side effects. And there'll be all these horror stories that, oh, so somebody after being vaccinated then died because of this, and so on. And the question is it truly the case that being vaccinated is more dangerous than being exposed to COVID, for example? Well, and of course, it could be true that people really think that vaccination is more dangerous, but based on especially some direct observations that they see from their friends or from Facebook or from Line or whatever group that they receive information. But of course, the question is, are people overweighting this small number of evidence? The other one is people are reluctant to change their minds. I don't know, you guys might be too young for this, but if you talk to your parents, you might see that a lot of the generation gap is created from, after the age of 50, they always think they're right. And the young generation think they're stubborn, but the old generation think they're all saints. So whatever they think is right. And this actually creates, like, say, confirmation bias. So reading the same newspaper article, different supporters would have completely different interpretation because they only read what confirms their own position. Actually, I've seen one of this very interesting experimental evidence that's on confirmation bias, that they tell you you will be representing which side of a court case, and then read the court case itself, and then you try to estimate how much would the judge award in that case. And you see that when you're assigned to be one side or the other, your estimates will be completely off, will be biased towards in favor of your side. But from the same subject pool, you find people that you have them read the court case first and then tell them you're on this side or the other, that you don't have this problem. So we do have this confirmation bias so if I tell you you're on this side, well, of course, in the US, it will be like, say, if you are Republican or Democrat. In Taiwan, you'll be either pro-green or pro-blue or whatever. But it's very easy to fall into this trap of confirmation bias where you only see evidence that's favoring your side. All right. Okay, so that's the main examples about people are not always rational. Now we'll move to the second insight, which is people care about fairness. So the key thing is that the original assumption we have is that people are self-interest. So I only care about my own payoffs. So that's the center of self-interest. But a lot of evidence that we can gather show that self-interest might be a way too simplified assumption of human behavior. So people are aware and they do care about fairness. But it is true that the sense of fairness is very subtle. So in different cultures, different countries, you could see people having different ideas about what is fair. And even within the same culture or country, you could see that because of the context, what is fair actually changes rapidly. So the leading example is actually one of the experiments that we did last time, which is the ultimatum game. So this is a game where two people who do not know each other choose how to share $100. So it's like this. So you have a proposer who decides how much to give, what portion of the $100 to give to the other side. And then you have a respondent. The responder can say accept or reject. If the responder accepts, then the money is split accordingly. If the responder rejects, both get zero. So the question is, if you are a proposer, how much would you offer the responder? And if you are the responder, of course, the question is, what offer would you accept? And as you saw in your classroom experiment, there are actually a variety of results. All right, so let's take a look. So what does theory say? So if you are a self-interest player, well, actually you could be rational but not self-interest. So if you're a self-interest player, you should propose to give the responder only $1 and keep $99. And the responder would be happy to accept the $1 because it's better than nothing. In a lot of laboratory and field experimental evidence, you see that that's not the case. Responders usually reject these unfair offers like 99 versus 1 because they think this is just insane. It's not fair. And for me to give up $1 so that whatever they curse on you, you will lose $99, yes. That's really worth it, that I revenge your unfairness with punishing you so that you won't get $99. And even though I'm giving up $1, that's great. So expecting this, most proposers usually offer between $30 or $40. And in this case, it's still unfair, but the responder says, should I give up $40 so that you lose $60? Maybe not. And so the majority of the responders would actually accept this slightly unfair offer. Although if you look at the data, there's a huge distribution. And usually the mode is 50-50. So it's like, equal split is the norm. So let's split it 50-50. But of course, there are a lot of very crazy things. Yeah, so here that gives us the leading example of people caring about fairness. But even there, you already see it's actually somewhat subtle because there could be reciprocity going on, or there could be a sense of unfairness or revenge or spitefulness and so on. Okay, the third insight we get from behavioral economics is people are inconsistent over time. So they prefer instant gratification, even though if you delay gratification, you would get even more. And so here you have this planning fallacy that even if you plan to do this, especially if it's not that comfortable or it takes a lot of effort to do this, then you won't follow through. One leading example would be part of your New Year's resolution could be, I need to do workouts, or I need to jog every day, or I need to wake up early in the morning and study. But yeah, it's not easy to follow through. There's willpower involved. Yeah, I mean, you stayed up very late for New Year's Eve, and can I wake up early? I mean, yeah. Or, oh, it's raining outside. Maybe I shouldn't go out for the workout today. And so what you plan to do, a lot of times you cannot follow through. So this is what we call inconsistency over time. And financially, this could be a huge problem because what you should do is to save for retirement. But if you're inconsistent over time, then you might decide that, hey, I might as well just max out my credit card, spend all of my money on having fun now, and forget about saving for retirement. And you actually see this in people's retirement savings. I mean, most of the cases, people undersave for retirement. And of course, what that means is that when they are close to retirement, they are now panicking because they don't have enough savings. But we don't really only stop here, because you can say, wait a minute, what are ways that you could try to help if you have this problem of inconsistency over time? Once I've heard a Harvard professor whose research is on this talking about smoking. Well, the problem for smoking is that, well, all the smokers know that it's good to quit smoking now. I mean, what's the best time to quit smoking? Now. But, well, when you ask people, when do you want to quit smoking? People would say, tomorrow. Or actually, if you want to start a new diet, or try to lose weight, or do a workout, or study for the final exam, what's the best time? Tomorrow. And tomorrow I come ask you again, you say, tomorrow. And then, yeah, so tomorrow never dies. So you never start. So how can you fix this problem? Actually, the Harvard professor, David Leibson's, actually he's one of the authors of the other textbook. So David's proposal was this. How do you keep complete freedom of choice, but still help smokers to pre-commit? And the answer is this. His proposal is that you should require smokers to pre-approve how many cigarettes they can buy 24 hours beforehand. So you can do this on an app or on a website or whatever. And then, yeah, so I pre-approve myself to only buy, say, 1 pack of cigarette. And so when you want to quit smoking, you say, tomorrow, then you pre-approve yourself 0 packs of cigarettes tomorrow. And so when tomorrow comes, when you try to buy your cigarette, so not only you have to show your ID, but you have to show your app. I pre-approved myself 24 hours before to buy the cigarette. And the 7-Eleven or whatever seller would say, I'm sorry, you already maxed out your limit because you pre-approved yourself to buy 0 packs 24 hours beforehand. If you want, you can pre-approve to buy a pack of cigarettes 24 hours later. And in this case, supposedly, well, you have the freedom to pre-approve yourself to buy as many cigarettes you want. But this does serve as a commitment device. So for somebody who wants to quit smoking but cannot start to do that, well, this commitment device would help him or her to quit smoking, but still preserving the full, you want to say, freedom of choice, because as long as you pre-approve yourself, you can buy as many as you want. And of course, a similar version, you can do this on saving plans. So actually, usually, so what companies do is they deduct the money that goes to your retirement account even before you see it. So your paycheck, they take it out like the tax withholdings and like say health insurance and so on. I mean, so you only receive the remaining amount, but you don't see it. So you're fine. Alternatively, actually, people even propose, and companies have adopted this, that you can pre-approve that I want to save even more. Next time, when I get a pay raise. So my income does not change now, but I already pre-commit myself that when I get a pay raise, then I would increase the amount that I contribute to my retirement account. And so I never experienced a drop. I just experienced a smaller pay raise than what the company told me. But still, I'm still happy. So there are these different ways trying to help people to commit themselves to what they plan. Okay, so the last example of this, we're going to talk about the dictator game. So this is very similar to the ultimatum game, except the responder cannot reject. It can only say, thank you, and accept the offer made. So the proposer proposes, let's split this 50-50 or 40-60 or 30-70 or 199 or whatever. And the responder can only say, thank you, and it's accepted. So that's why it's called the dictator game. Okay, so while in the ultimatum game, most proposers would offer a fair or relatively fair 30-40 to the responder, how would their answers change in the dictator game? That's question number one. And question number two is, how would your answer change if, as a proposer, you would have the ability to not only give money, but also take money, take up to $50 from the responder? So in that case, what would you do? All right, so let's start. Now, first, this is a prediction question. So while in the ultimatum game, most proposers would offer a fair $30 to $40 to the responder, how would their answers change in the dictator game? Most will offer 0. Proposer offer will be higher than the $30 average, or it will be similar to the $30 average, or lower than the $30 average. Okay, so a lot of you say most will offer 0. You guys are so mean. But some say it's lower. So I think the consensus is lower. Yes, and the answer is indeed, it is lower. Yeah, so it is true that people offer lower in the dictator game, but it's not as extreme that most are going to offer 0. Okay, but how about this? Okay, so this is not a quiz, this is a survey question. How will your answer change if, as a proposer, we would have the ability to not only give money, but also to take money up to $50 from the responder? So I will offer 0, or even take money. Sounds really mean. My proposer would be higher or similar or lower than the $30 average of the ultimatum game. Okay, so let's see your answers. So a lot of you say, I would offer 0 or even take money. Okay, now here's the fun question. So people actually run this experiment. So instead of not only giving money, you could choose to take up to $50 from the responder. And so how do you think proposers in the lab would behave if they have the ability to not only give money, but also to take money from the responder? People actually ran this experiment, so there is empirical data on this answer. So what's your prediction? Ooh, so a lot of you say most people will offer 0, but some will take money. And yes, that is the right answer. Yeah. So here immediately you see how the concept of fairness could be very subtle. It's still the same ultimatum game, just that instead of only proposing from 0 to 100, I could propose negative or take money from you. And now all of a sudden, well, I'm very nice to you that I'm not taking money from you. And I'm happy to keep the $100. And you accept that. Well, because there are people even worse out there that are taking money. So to summarize this chapter, So in many economic transactions, information is asymmetric. That's our first part when we talk about hidden action or hidden characteristics, where moral hazard and adverse selection occurs, respectively. And there are some private solutions through signaling and screening. And the second part of this lecture, we talked about political economy, saying that government itself is an imperfect institution. It consists of people who are self-interest as well. And so we saw the Condorcet paradox, we saw Arrow's impossibility theorem, and we also saw the medium voter theorem. Yeah, so finally, we talked about psychology and economics. And so we see that people may not always be rational, that people care about fairness, and they can be inconsistent over time. Okay, yeah, so I was hoping to give you a experiment 13, but it's a mean one because it is the lemon market. That is the example of asymmetric information. If we don't have time, then great, then you won't get ripped off on the lemon market. Political economy is really talking about politicians as firms or as self-interest people. Then economics and psychology, yeah, so this really is about the frontier, the research that I do, which contrasts what economic theory says and what people actually do. Okay, so my own research is on these frontiers, so we can talk about this after class, but I should give you the homework first. Here you see that it hasn't come up that frequently in the past finals, although in the past couple years, so it popped up now and then. So, okay, let's see, what questions do we have? So as long as we put all three choices at one time, the problem should not occur. I think this is from last week's political economies question about, suppose we have three candidates, then the order would determine who will win. And so the question here is that if we put three choices at once, would the problem be solved? And the problem is this. So for majority voting, the problem is that if you have three or more candidates, simple majority could mean that one candidate got 40% of the votes, another candidate got 30% of the votes, and the last candidate also got 30% of the votes. So even though the leading candidate, who only won the simple majority election, but the leading candidate only got 40% of the votes, which is a minority. In the year 2000, President Chen Shui-bian was elected at a 40% vote share. And that caused a huge backlash and debate about whether or not this is a problem. Because the other two candidates actually both came from the same party. And so they were like, oh, so if we join forces, yeah, there's this problem of strategic voting that if you are number 3 candidate supporter, but you prefer number 2 to number 1, should you vote for your second best choice instead of your first best choice? So here there's a lot of issues going on. If you're interested, actually one of the final exam question is on this. I think it's 2018. It's talking about National Taiwan University electing its president. And happily, National Taiwan University is going to elect its president this coming year as well. Yeah, so maybe 4 years' time, it's again that I should ask something like this when the new president comes out. So if you want to look at that, you should check out that question. So having 3 choices on the ballot, you still have this problem that if you are the supporter of the third candidate, so what should you do? Because do you want to still support your favorite candidate, or should you strategically support number 2? Actually, in a lot of presidential elections, what different countries do is they actually have this runoff that the first round you have one simple majority voting, but then you pick the top 2 candidates who go into round 2. And of course, then you can try to support whichever you prefer. So that's a possibility. But Arrow's impossibility theorem tells us that there is no silver bullet here. And it's today the last class of economics? Yes. So thank you very much. And so what I love to do is to talk about my own research because I do research on this frontier. My favorite topic is strategic information transmission. I've published in a whole bunch of different journals on this topic. So strategic information transmission sounds crazy, but it just means lying. So I published in a whole bunch of different journals on this, including the best economics journal and the best political science journal. Yeah, so that's one of my favorite topics. I also did some political economy experiments, although less successful. And I also do some eye tracking experiments, especially on behavioral economics. Yeah, so I also published in psychology, although I think my contribution to that paper is not as big as the other papers. So if you're interested in eye tracking, it's basically putting cameras in front of you when you look at the screen so that I can map out what information you're looking at on the screen before you make your choice. So I try to look at your choice process. And there is a paper that I did on preferences and Confucianism. And finally, if you remember, experiment 1 is on the loopy game. I also did a whole bunch of experiments on that. So yeah, so I think that's it. Okay, the last slide I think I have to show you because I think I already gave you this in chapter 19. But I do want to say that there is an exchange program that's funded by the Ministry of Education that could actually fund your visit abroad. That would be very helpful if you want to exchange, but you think that it's very hard to get to a good school or you have to pay a lot. They actually give you, not only pay for your tuition, but they give you a stipend, a monthly allowance. And so even if your family cannot afford this, somebody's going to fund you. All right, so thank you very much for the whole semester, and good luck on the final exam.